Today for our webinar, Harnessing Generational and Gender Differences to Develop Leadership Skills with the MBTI tool. My name is Karen Gonzalez, and I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at CBP, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today's webinar will run for approximately 90 minutes. During the presentation, if you have questions, please submit them to me using the questions function in the webinar controls. Sandra will be pausing throughout the webinar today to answer your questions. We have two representatives from CBP's education team here. We have Jim Larkin and Jack Powers, and they're going to be available to answer questions as well. Now, as with all of our recordings, today's webinar is being recorded, and we'll be sending out a link to that in the next few days. Please note that the PowerPoint slides are not available for our Ask an Expert series. Now, I have one quick thing to share. This will be my last Ask an Expert webinar as your moderator, but don't worry, the series is going to continue. I'm just transitioning into a new role. But I'll be passing on the baton over to our new Associate Marketing Manager, Kim Rivera, starting with our next series in 2014-2015, which is going to be in September. Therefore, of course, I have to do one of my favorite things, which is tweet with you. So I have a special giveaway this time. Sandra, do you mind switching to the next slide, please? So we have our very first ebook, which is actually on relationships and conflict. We have this available on our website, so you can all download it, but we did only print a few copies of this. So I wanted to give some out. So here are the rules. Make sure that you follow us, so it's at CBP Education. Make sure that you use CBP AAE in all of your tweets. No repeat tweets are allowed. The contest is going to end today at 1 p.m. Pacific Daylight Time, and I will be announcing the winners on Twitter. So now I'm very happy to welcome to you as CBP's Ask an Expert, Sandra Struth. Sandra is a Human Resources Manager at Intermountain Healthcare. She has 20 years of experience creating HR and development solutions that align with business strategy and achieve results in a variety of industries at global and Fortune 500 companies. Sandra has published over a dozen works and contributed to the chapter Career Development to Engage and Retain High Potential Emerging Leaders to Integrated Talent Management Scorecard. So please join me in welcoming Sandra as I turn over the webinar to her. Welcome, Sandra.
Thank you for that introduction, and thanks for having me today. Today we're going to talk about generational differences and their impact on career choices and career development. We're also going to learn a little bit more about the research on women in leadership. We'll talk about some key skills needed to advance into a leadership role, and we'll dispel some common myths associated with the Myers Briggs. You'll be able to use this information and apply the Myers Briggs to help individuals better understand their strengths, make effective career choices, and pinpoint a career path or the next job that aligns with their personality preferences. Then we'll also talk about how to use all of this information to effectively manage diversity in a career planning program and how to establish a scorecard to measure your overall success. Let's start first by talking about career development in general. So, many of you work at institutions of varying sizes and scope or offer individual coaching and counseling services. Any of those services start with a clear framework, so an understanding of the career development process and clear roles for you as the provider of those services and for the individual that's receiving the coaching or career development program. Any career development program can benefit by using multiple assessments that can help define their interests, the kind of work that they really like to do. The Strong Interest Inventory is one assessment that CPP offers that's helpful in defining interests. Assessments can help define style. The Myers Briggs is one of those assessments that is associated with our style and what kind of work best suits our personality style and preferences. Generation also plays into that, the kind of work that we are interested in and our style in terms of the way that we work with others. Values are also important to consider. And then our skills, experiences, and competencies, the kind of experience that we have and the kind of experiences that we hope to gain in our future role. So we'll also talk today a little bit about some of the key skills that are important to advance in a leadership role. All of this information should be captured into a career development plan with specific actions and next steps, short-term and long-term goals for things that the individual hopes to accomplish within the next 1 to 2 and 3 to 5 years. And then in any institutional program, it's important to think about measuring the impact. Let's start by talking a little bit about the impact of generations on careers. So why focus on generations? There's lots of research and lots of articles and books on the topic, and the research has shown over and over again that each generation brings specific views about career. A lot of people are unaware of those differences, and if we're unaware of them and don't address them, it can become a cause of dissatisfaction and low productivity. So if we know about some of those different approaches and preferences around work, it can help us engage and develop people. If we think about the research shows that up to 60% of our baby boomer population is eligible for retirement within the next 3 years. One of the articles that I've read says there's a baby boomer retiring 1 every 8 seconds. So it's very important that we think about this and think about developing our future generations. There are 4 generations in the workplace today: the traditional, veteran, or silent generation, the baby boomer generation, Generation X, and Generation Y, or the millennial generation. When it comes to views about career and work, if we think about each one of those generations, they're influenced by their life experiences. So if we think about the traditional veteran or silent generation, this is the generation that lived through the Great Depression. So when it comes to work and work ethic, they tend to value hard work. They respect authority. They view work as an obligation. When it comes to feedback, they believe that no news is good news, and they're satisfied with a job well done. So you tend to see a lot of loyalty to the employer. The baby boomer generation, on the other hand, lived through things like the civil rights movement. They may question authority. They tend to be workaholics, tend to work long hours, but they view work as an exciting adventure. They're loyal to the employer with reservations, and they tend to have the attitude that they live to work. Work is very important. When it comes to Generation X is the generation that saw the introduction of MTV, saw the Watergate scandal. They tend to be a little bit more skeptical. They view work as a contract. They're loyal to their career and their profession, but they also tend to be more self-reliant. This is the first generation that in many instances had both working parents. So self-reliance is very important. They tend to be loyal to good bosses and their profession rather than the employer. So the attitude is a little bit more working to live and more interest in work-life balance. Generation Y, or the millennial generation, saw the introduction of new technologies September 11th. They view work as a fulfillment. They're very interested in goals. They expect career options and work-life balance, and they're also very interested in immediate feedback. Now, while those are generalizations, and all of us have different attitudes with respect to work and career, those are some of the themes that have shown up in these different generations. When it comes to the women in leadership research, if we think about women, women represent half of the workforce today. But if we look at women in key leadership roles, from Fortune 500 CEOs to heads of state, senators or members of parliament, college and university presidents, the Congress, and not-for-profit organizations, the representation of women in leadership only ranges from 3 to 33%. So they're a bit underrepresented there. So it's important to think about why that is. If we think about it globally, you'll find that the U.S. And France are lagging behind Norway and Sweden with women representation in corporate boards. So some of the reasons for that, if you look at the research, is that the research shows that women often stunt their careers unintentionally. Some of the behaviors that have been recognized in women are things like being overly modest, not asking for raises or promotions, blending in, and remaining silent. So it's important that we think about diversity in career planning programs and the coaching that we offer so that we can help people of different generations as well as women and all individuals interested in a leadership position develop some key skills that will help them be successful to advance. The interesting thing is I first started this research back when I was in college, and if you look back, the information hasn't changed in well over a decade. So it's interesting to see that, you know, looking back, I'm kind of dating myself here, but looking back, it hasn't changed much in many years. So some of the key skills needed to rise to the top leadership levels are skills like decisiveness, assertive communication, political and organization savvy, the ability to engage and inspire performance in others, and work-life balance. When it comes to skills, experiences, and competencies, this is the piece of the puzzle that really helps explain why some people are more successful in leadership roles than others. So Karen, this is probably a good place to pause for questions if we have any questions so far.
Thanks, Sandra. We haven't gotten a lot in, but Michelle, I think there was one slide, the one with the 4 puzzle pieces. Do you mind going back to that real quick?
Sure.
I think she just wanted to look at it. Michelle, I'm not sure if you had another question or if you just wanted, oh, she was asking what the 4 puzzle pieces are in that slide.
Okay, yeah, if you think about the 4 puzzle pieces, these are really 4 areas that are important to think about when it comes to helping individuals define what's really important to them in their career. So you kind of have to have all 4. If you think about my next step in my career and I only focus on something that I'm interested in, while I may be very interested in rocket science, if I'm not able to do math, if I don't have the skill to be able to do math, I might not be very successful at that. So these are 4 pieces that you can help an individual look at that can really help define what might be an appropriate next step. So they need to keep in mind work that they're really interested in doing. This piece, I think, is most important to ensure that they're going to be happy in that career and really be satisfied and engaged with that next position. Thinking about the style, my generation might play into that, you know, in terms of my style and the way that I value feedback or the way that I like to work with others. Myers Briggs personality type also plays into that in terms of the kind of work environment that I would prefer based upon my preference. There are other assessments like the Thomas Kilmann and my approach to conflict that might influence my style with working with others. Values is the piece around what's really important to me and how important is work. So thinking about values is important from the perspective of thinking about things like my work hours, my willingness to travel, and perhaps how important my work is compared to other things in my life. It may be that my family is most important to me and I may want to pass on a leadership role that requires long hours or lots of travel. And then the skills, experiences, and competency piece, it's like the example with math. If you don't have the skill to do the position, you probably won't be real successful at that, or you need to think about skills that you need to develop to be successful in that role. So you really have to have all 4 of those pieces in place and think about all 4 of those pieces as you're defining a career path.
Thanks, Sandra. Another question is from Barbara. Are the stats on baby boomers, when it says 60% and when retiring every 8 seconds, pertaining just to the U.S.?
Yes, that's pulled from an article, and the name of the article is Developing the Next Generation of Leaders. And so that would be where you could find some of that information. And there are lots of other articles out there that show similar findings. The other thing I think that's particularly relevant when it comes to developing our future leaders is that if you take a look, you know, across the board, a lot of companies are really challenged with the process of identifying future leaders. But there is research that shows companies that have a formal process in place for identifying future leaders and having effective high potential development programs and succession planning processes, those companies are more profitable and perform better than other companies. So, you know, again, additional information that emphasizes the importance of thinking about our future leaders.
Thank you. Do you have time for another question?
Sure.
Okay, and just real quick, I just want to make a comment. We are recording this webinar. While the slides are not available for this webinar, you will be getting the recording and in a couple of days, if not by next week. So just FYI for that. So another question by Andrea is there a particular assessment that you would recommend to help clients to think about their values?
You know, that's a tough question. I know there are a number of tools and products out there. It's a tough question for me because there at one time was a CPP assessment that I've utilized, but my understanding is that it's no longer available. There was a work-life assessment. So I will throw that out to the group to say if there is an assessment that you've utilized, if you could send in your comments to Karen, perhaps we can share that with others.
Great, thanks. And Bruce asked, please define skills and competencies and explain how they differ.
Mm-hmm. So a skill is, it may be a technical skill, for example, in terms of how I perform that work. And it may also be one of the skills that are mentioned on this slide. So the ability to communicate effectively or communicate assertively, I would view as a skill. A competency is often described as how that skill or how the work is performed. So oftentimes we're thinking about behaviorally, not what it is that's done, but the approach in terms of how it's done as to whether I'm competent at and demonstrating that behavioral competency for doing it.
And one quick question, so I don't take too much time with questions, but the other one is from Beth. What is the post-millennial generation called?
The post-millennial generation, you know, I've heard a couple of terms that have been thrown out, but I haven't seen any definitive research on that in terms of one that has been identified at this point. You know, I've just heard things that have been thrown out, but nothing real definitive in terms of anything that's been adapted at this point. But that's a great question. We need to start planning and thinking about that new generation that's in the workforce. And I believe that as time goes on, we'll have more information about their career views and how they tend to approach work. So there's not a whole lot out there just yet at this point.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. I'll hold off on a couple others so you can just continue. We'll make another stop later.
Okay.
Thank you.
So let's think about, when it comes to all of this, how can we leverage the Myers Briggs? If we think about the Myers Briggs, it's a tool that really helps us understand our basic behaviors, our strengths, our development areas, and the impact we have on others. So if we know our type, that can help us define the kind of work environment, the role, and the tasks that best fit us. Why do we care about Myers-Briggs? Our personality type affects the way that we approach decisions. It impacts our communication with others. If we can understand our strengths and our areas for development, we can use that information to communicate more effectively. We can also use this information to help us make effective career choices while taking into consideration a lot of those other pieces of the puzzle. So we're going to talk about some common beliefs associated with the Myers-Briggs. The first one is that the Myers-Briggs tool should be used in hiring to find candidates with the best personality match for the job. So I believe we're going to do a quick poll. So you should have access to the polling equipment. And Karen, let's go ahead and start the poll on this.
Okay, sure thing. Let me start that.
So for example, an introvert might be less effective as a salesperson if we were trying to hire the best personality match for the job. Let's say if you were reading one of the books on career choices, and there are many CPP publications as well as books available on the Myers-Briggs and career, you might see that law enforcement is a typical career choice for an ISTJ. So we could assume that someone that is an ENFP might be less effective in law enforcement. What do you think about that?
Okay. I'm giving a couple more seconds to answer, and I'll close it up. Okay, I'm going to close it now. And let me share this on the screen so everybody can see what everyone answered. Okay, there it is.
Okay, so how did our poll results?
So it shows up, let's see here, 11% said true, and the majority, 89%, said false.
Okay, all right. Well, the majority of you, 89%, got that question right. This is actually a myth. So the Myers-Briggs is not about predicting behavior or performance. People of many different types can excel in exactly the same job for different reasons. So it's important that we don't pigeonhole people into a career choice or into a role based on their personality type. So although someone might be an introvert, they might be able to be a very effective salesperson. And we all can use all of those preferences. The Myers-Briggs assessment is very well researched. The tool is 70 years old. There's lots of research that happened before the first publication, 19 years. And for 38 years, CPP has been updating, improving, and publishing it. It's translated into 26 languages. An estimated 50 million people have taken the Myers-Briggs. And each year, about 2 million people take the Myers-Briggs. That's more than the population of Rhode Island, Maine, or Idaho. So quite a significant number of people are using the Myers-Briggs and familiar with it. Let's think about the first skill that we mentioned as important to advance in a leadership role. And we're going to look at each one of these skills that we talked about earlier. So when it comes to decisiveness, and we think about the Myers-Briggs, the majority of women, about 60%, are feelers. Studies have shown that feeler types are less likely to score well on assessments that measure critical thinking approaches and techniques such as evaluating arguments and drawing conclusions. So there may be an impact on our decisiveness. Let's do another polling question.
Okay, I'll watch it.
So, thinking about the Myers Briggs, it's a common belief that perhaps sensing thinking types are better decision makers than intuitive feeling types because they're more attentive to detail and logic. Do you think that's a fact or a myth? So how many polling responses do we have so far?
So we're at about 73% that are voting. So I'm giving a couple more seconds, a few more seconds. Okay, get your last ones in. I'm about to close it. Almost at 80%. Okay. Now let me share that. Okay. So we got 8% that are true and 92% false.
Okay. So actually the 92% that said false got this one right. So actually this is a myth as well. Even though we might be tempted to believe that, actually all types can make effective decisions. And sometimes we arrive at exactly the same decision. The difference is the method at which we might approach it or the factors that we might consider first before we arrive at that decision. And all types have the ability to use all four preferences for gathering information and evaluating it in the process of planning and decision making. So what's important here to know about decisiveness is decisiveness and effective decision making is a skill that can be developed and practiced. There are a lot of courses available, things like strategic thinking programs, critical thinking programs, and there are many tools that can be used to help us with our decision making. A lot of quality improvement programs have a number of different tools for looking at information, evaluating arguments, and drawing conclusions. So those are skills that can be practiced and learned. The next skill we're going to talk about that's really important in a leadership position is the ability to communicate assertively. So what I mean by assertiveness is having the ability, the courage, and the confidence to express your own feelings and assert your own rights or your own position while respecting others. So assertive communication is being appropriately direct, open, and honest. We have another polling question. So when it comes to the Myers Briggs, a lot of people believe that extroverts are naturally more assertive than introverts. Let's see what you think. So let's open the polling on this one. So how many responses do we have so far, Karen?
So far we are at about 77%. People are answering pretty fast.
Okay.
Okay, I'll give it about 5 more seconds.
Okay.
Okay. And I'll show the results. Okay. So we got 21% that thought this was true and 79% false.
Okay, interesting. So actually, this is another myth. While a lot of people tend to believe that extroverts are more assertive than introverts, actually people of all types can be equally tenacious when it comes to getting what they want. And the behavior that sometimes we call as assertive may stem from a number of different sources, including our culture, our belief systems, the things that we value, things that we believe are important. It may be that I'm going to be less assertive about something if I just think it's unimportant or trivial. So while there's a link between assertiveness and the Myers Briggs, it hasn't been determined exactly what that link is. Type does influence what we get fired up about, as well as how we approach others in achieving our aims. Again, this is a myth. Introverts can be equally assertive or sometimes more assertive depending upon the situation and depending upon what's important to us. I think one of the important things to think about here is the balance between being perceived as too nice as a leader and being perceived as overly aggressive. So if we think about assertiveness being that appropriate communication, it's finding the appropriate balance so that we're achieving what we want or asserting our opinion, making sure that opinion is heard, and being respectful to others. The next skill we're going to talk about is political and organization savvy. So as you move up into higher level leadership roles, it becomes more and more important, especially in the senior leadership ranks, to have effective networks. You're no longer just interacting with your own team, but you're building relationships across the organization and sometimes competing for resources with other teams across the organization. So strong interpersonal relationships and networks within organizations becomes more and more important as you rise to senior leadership positions. It's also important when you think about career to have professional associations and other networks outside of work that are important to your success. Formal and informal mentors can help influence personal development and career success. So let's think about the Myers Briggs and how that might play into this. It's a common belief that people who prefer introversion might be less inclined to build networks and perhaps should avoid a high-stress, high-visibility occupation, such as a senior leadership role. And actually, this is another myth. So there are lots of examples of individuals that have indicated a preference for introversion that have been very successful in high-visibility, stressful occupations, and leadership roles. A few examples are Steve Jobs, Barack Obama, and Princess Diana. The Myers Briggs helps identify how you're energized, not how outgoing you are or how effective you might be in a leadership role or another high visibility position. So that is something that's important to consider. The next skill that we're going to talk about is having the ability to engage and inspire performance in others. And this is really about striking a balance between achieving results and maintaining effective relationships. Communicating often and using multiple methods of communication. So, many times I've seen individuals who are less effective at this rely on one method, always sending the email. So it's about using multiple methods, in-person communication, email, conference calls, communicating with people frequently, and using a number of different techniques so that you engage everyone in the process. Having the ability to listen and also the ability to direct others when appropriate. So from my own personal experience, Judy Johansson is a leader that comes to mind that, in my experience, I believe was effective at this. And some of the words that have been written about her by the Marylhurst University Board upon her appointment as president are that she's a proven organizational leader and a strategic thinker. She's a good listener, a quick learner, and she knows how to bring out the best in people, including those with more expertise than her own. There's also research by Zinger-Folkman that says this is the #1 quality that distinguishes extraordinary leaders from other leaders. So the ability to inspire others and connect them with the vision or purpose of the organization, in addition to achieving results and having the other technical skills that are important to the organization. So let's think about the Myers Briggs. Sometimes we might tend to believe that intuitive types would be more inspiring than sensors. Do you think that's a fact or a myth? Actually, this is another myth. So it's a common misperception about Myers Briggs. All types have the ability to be inspiring. Inspiring others really is about being able to share your own story, your own experience, or examples. It may be examples of others, and bring hope and encouragement to others in the workplace. So Mother Teresa is an example of someone that indicates a preference for sensing, but has been a very inspiring person. The last skill that we're going to talk about today is work-life balance. So work-life balance is an expression that was first used in the 1970s to describe the balance between an individual's work and their personal life. It's about fulfillment both in the workplace and outside of the workplace, and having the ability to appropriately manage stress in both your personal life and in your professional setting. So thinking about this and thinking about those 4 puzzle pieces that we talked about earlier, I think this is where interests really come into play. I think that if you are truly in a position that you are interested in my own experience, if I really am interested and engaged in the work, I don't mind working long hours. So that's where that interest piece becomes extremely important to make sure that we are satisfied. Let's look at another common belief. So sometimes we tend to think that extroverts are more gregarious and only introverts can spend weeks alone. Actually, this is a myth. When it comes to finding balance, all types need a balance of spending time alone and spending time with others. And people of all types value relationships in different ways. And we all rely on our social ties and interaction with others for survival and for, really achieving that feeling of work-life balance. I've read, there are a lot of books about this and a lot of research about this as well. I've read that if we look at the U.S. population, we tend to spend a lot of time at work compared to people in other countries. So we tend to have less vacation time, less paid time off. And one study that I read said that 62% of the U.S. workforce believes that their workload has increased in the past 6 months. And 70% of their employers or companies agree with that. So our workplace is very demanding. Also, considering the new technology that we have, you almost have the ability to be reached anywhere with laptop computers, cell phones, iPhones. You can get your email almost anywhere now. So it becomes more important to think about individually how you might be more effective at achieving the feeling of work-life balance. So this is really individually defined in terms of how you would go about doing that and how you would effectively manage stress both in your personal and work life. There are some techniques and some things that you can do, but different ones will work for different individuals. So thinking about how much interaction you need with others, thinking about being more productive at work, thinking about techniques like perhaps leaving work at work or learning when to say no, and making sure that you enjoy your weekends and get appropriate number of hours of sleep. Those are all kinds of activities that can help achieve work-life balance. So we've talked about 5 of those skills that are important to develop and important to think about for those individuals that are interested in moving up into a leadership role. So let's think about where do we go from here. We've talked about generational differences and the importance of planning for future leaders. We've talked about some of the research on women in leadership. The research also shows that companies with the highest level of gender diversity in those leadership roles tend to outperform in a number of areas: return on equity, operating results, and stock price growth. So how do we leverage the Myers Briggs, and how do we help individuals plan for their next career step and identify their interest in a leadership position or the next step in their career that will help them get there? Individually, as you work with people, whether it's a student or someone you're coaching, or it could be individuals in a group setting if you have a structured career development program, individually you can help people put those 4 pieces of the puzzle together by thinking about each piece in that equation. First of all, helping them define their interests. Really thinking about the leadership role and whether they're interested in leading a team. That's really important. Oftentimes you find sometimes companies make the mistake, or individuals make the mistake, of moving into a leadership role when they're really interested in doing the technical work, and they're not as interested in leading or coaching and developing others. So it's important to help people understand their true interests. And then the second piece, helping them understand the skills that they have. It may be that they are truly effective at assertive communication, or they may be interested in that leadership position, but they may need to develop more assertive communication skills. So thinking about the skills that they need to develop, the experiences that would help them develop those skills. It may be that before moving into that leadership role, that it would be helpful to lead a small project team and utilize some of those skills, gain that experience of working with a team and leading a team, and other behavioral competencies in terms of how they approach work. The third piece is thinking about their style, using assessments like the Myers Briggs, as well as assessments like the Thomas Kilmann, and other preferences around their work environment. So our Myers Briggs type influences the kind of work environment that we would prefer based upon our preferences. And then the fourth piece, considering what's important to their own happiness, thinking about the values and truly what's important to them. This is a good time to pause and check to see if anyone sent in the name of a particular values assessment.
Okay, there were a few that we got in. Donna suggested there's a career values scale from Psychometrics Canada. Okay. There was also there were a lot that are still coming in. Patrick Kerwin's Kerwin Values Survey from Aubrey. There was also, actually, let me scroll down, Michelle shared a generational book written by a father-daughter team published recently by the American Management Association refers to them as linksters. So talking about, I think somebody had asked a question about the post-generational term. So thank you. Let's see. There is another, it's Dick Nodell's, and I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. Dick Nodell's Values Card Sort is also really good. For executives, there's Ed Shine's, I believe, Career Anchors. Let's see here, a few more. I did have a couple of questions from people. They were interested in the generational topic that you were talking about, and they were wondering if you're going to go over a little bit more around that, just the generational slide that you had talked about. I wasn't sure if you'd go over a little bit more after. And let's see here. I think those were the main ones. I'm trying to see if there's more. There is values-driven work available from the NOVA group. Was used by CCAC. They said that it's excellent. It's by Dick Nodell. Or I think that's the one I just said. And sorry, everyone, I'm reading through these because as questions come in, I lose my spot. So, let's see here. Nancy sent one in. She says, we have an assessment to measure values. Organization, collaborative, culture survey, and report. Assess values. You may find it on our website, which is execintelsolutions.com, or you can just search for it on Amazon or Google Play Books.
Okay, so great.
Sending that.
So, as you can see, there are a number of different values assessments available out there. And so what you may want to do is take a look at some of those that were recommended and choose one that will work best for you in your career development program. But all of that, all of those assessments are possible choices. It's a matter of finding the one that will work best for you and considering certifications that are required or whether it's something that you can just purchase and use. How we use all this information is choosing those assessments and thinking about each one of these pieces and then helping the individual put all this information together. So here's an example of how you might use this in helping someone define the next step in their career path. So you might help them write an ideal job description. What does this next position that I'm really interested in look like? So first of all, they would write a description of what they're really interested in doing. It might be managing and leading teams. It might be process improvement. Or accomplishing results by setting goals and identifying priorities and delivering results. So helping them define their interests. And then thinking about the skills, the experiences, and the competencies. In this piece, you could include work-related technical skills as well as other competencies like customer focus, or process management, the ability to set priorities effectively, build effective teams, all of those pieces, including the skills that they want to use that they already possess, as well as skills they'd like to develop in their next role. Their style, we mentioned Myers Briggs preferences play into that. So depending upon my preferences, I might have a preference for a slower-paced environment that would allow time for research and accuracy. Or I might prefer process-related decision-making where I can make sure that my decisions are accurate rather than a high-visibility, high-stress position where I may need to make decisions quickly. Values is the piece around what's most important to me in my work and my life. So an example of how to use this would be writing a description of what's most important to me, perhaps using one of those assessments to identify those priorities, and thinking about the limitations that I want to place on work in terms of overall work hours, and the percent of time that I might be willing to travel. Those are some of the considerations that your values can help you make. So taking all of this information, putting it together, forming this description of what my ideal position might look like can help you coach individuals as to whether or not a leadership position would be appropriate. And then it's important, once they have this description or picture of what their next step might look like, to keep in mind the ideal job is not always available. So, you know, sometimes it's helpful to look at different career paths within an organization, or to do research on job descriptions online, to think about what a typical management position or supervisor position might entail, or if it's another technical position, trying to find a position that's a close match with my ideal is preferable. But we don't always get exactly that match. So keeping everything in perspective, you want to help them balance reality with their ideal and keep in mind what might be an effective next step. Another process or another tool that you can use to help people with their career plan is the Z method of decision making. So keeping in mind our Myers Briggs preferences as we're thinking about career, it would be using all of those preferences that are associated with gathering information and making decisions or career choices about our next step. So using our sensing preference to look at all the facts. The facts might include a list of transferable skills that I possess, or a list of experiences where I've demonstrated accomplishments. Using the N preference, thinking about my ideal job description and my vision for my career plan, my goals for the next 3 to 5 years, if I think about the big picture and where I want to be. The T preference, the thinking preference, can help think through that rationale around my career choice. Really thinking about it logically and weighing the pros and cons of stepping into a higher level position. Thinking about the consequences that it might have on me or my family or others that are important to me. So looking at that T preference and applying the logic to the situation can help make an effective career choice. And then finally, looking at the F preference, the feeling preference, taking into consideration the impact on people, my values, is this choice in line with what's really important to me in my life? So this is another method or process that might be useful as you're working with individuals to think about career decisions. So we've talked about individually how you might apply this. When it comes to the broader organization and you think about the career planning programs that you have in place, and going back to that question about the generational differences and the research on gender in the workplace, you know, I do think there are a lot of things that you can do to effectively plan for and measure the success of your program, considering the diversity and the need to develop future leaders of future generations who may be very different from your current leadership, people in your current leadership roles. So if we think about the impact of generational differences and gender differences, some of the things that you can do are think about your career planning and career development programs and offer things like telecommuting and flexible schedules. You know, we saw earlier that work-life balance is very important to the Generation X and the millennial generation. And we'll know more about that new generation as more books are published and more research comes out. Another piece is thinking about how to involve your current leadership team. So involving the executive team, the CEO, or key faculty members in monitoring the progress of the program, and also if you have opportunities to include them in introductions or communications about the program, or sometimes if you're offering a workshop, if you have the opportunity for them to step in and participate. It's very helpful to have that visibility with the senior leadership team. Another thing that you can do is encourage networking and exposure to key individuals in the organization, whether it be faculty or others in a leadership position. So, you know, sometimes more formal mentoring programs or formal networking events are helpful in doing that. Encouraging senior executives and faculty members to mentor others and develop others. Also think about your evaluation systems and how you neutralize the impact of things like flexible work arrangements and parental leaves when you're evaluating performance. Sometimes it's a challenge for leaders to really identify solid metrics and think about results. How am I going to measure results versus the method that someone uses for achieving them? But what you really want to do is look at the results that are accomplished when you look at performance evaluations. The next thing that you can think about are indicators of your overall performance when it comes to promoting and developing people internally. There again is a lot of information that suggests if we can promote and develop people internally, oftentimes, especially when it comes to senior leadership roles at the executive level, those individuals that step into those senior roles through an internal promotion are often more successful than bringing in someone from outside the organization. Because there are many things that need to be learned when you come in from outside, even though you may have all of those leadership skills. Many things particular to the institution. It may be the culture that's unique, or the business, information about the business that's unique and specific to the business that needs to be learned. You can offer support programs to help reconcile work and family life balance, and then also plan for smooth transitions before, during, and after parental leave. So those are some measures, some specific strategic things that you can think about as you're looking at an overall institutional career planning program. And then when it comes to measuring the success of your program, you'll want to think through a scorecard or a method for doing that. This is an example of a career development scorecard. So one of the ways that you might show success in a number of different areas. It's helpful to identify who's in your target audience, who's receiving your career services, the overall numbers and the duration of the program, and again, demonstrate your overall goals, and then show your results for achieving those goals on a number of levels. A level 1 might be just a simple evaluation or feedback from the individuals that receive your services. It could be a simple survey, an evaluation form at the end of a workshop, or feedback that's given one-on-one immediately after a coaching session. At level 2, or thinking about the learning that the individual receives, what you would want to do is really measure whether or not the individual retained information and whether or not they've actually learned new knowledge or new skills upon receiving your services. So one way to do that is through the use of pre- and post surveys. At a level 3, we're looking at actions that individuals take after the program. So say, for example, we've had a coaching session and we've talked through an ideal job description. what actions or what steps has the individual taken within the 90 days after the coaching session to actually move forward and gather research on positions that are a good fit for that ideal description. What job descriptions have they looked at? Have they reached out and talked to someone that's in one of those positions? So there are all kinds of actions that can be taken after receiving career coaching or attending a career development program. And then you also have tangible benefits that can be measured, and intangible benefits, things like retention rates for those who receive career coaching and planning versus those who don't, and benefits like the impact on their overall morale, their satisfaction, their engagement, maybe their likelihood to recommend you to another client. All of those would be indicators that may be valuable to capture. And if you're working in an institution, it's also very valuable to share this information with your senior leadership if you want to gain support or retain the budget, monetary support for your program as well. So this is an example of a scorecard and how you might demonstrate your success. So we talked about a lot of different things in a very short amount of time. There's more information that's available on all of the topics that we talked about. If you're interested in more on the concepts around women in leadership, there's an article called Women, Water, and Leadership that's available on the ASTD website from Training and Development magazine. If you're interested in more around the career choices example or using the Z method, that's available on cpp.com. Information on developing the next generation of leaders is available in the Developing Next Generation article that's available through Emerald Insight, and there are lots of other books on this topic that are available. And then finally, the information on career development scorecards and measuring the impact of career development is available in the Integrated Talent Management Scorecards book, which is available through ASTD Press. So we've covered a lot, and I'm certain there's a lot more information out there, and perhaps a lot more questions. This might be a good time to pause for questions.
Thanks, Sandra. Yeah, this is great. There was a lot of topics, and I feel like from all of these different topics that you covered, we can actually do a whole webinar series on them and just expand a lot more. So yeah, it's great.
Yeah.
Let me see. Okay, I did have someone who had asked about if you can go back to, let's see here, the generational.
Mm-hmm.
Let me see where it is. Okay, so she wanted to revisit the slide, the quad chart of generations and types. There we go. Okay, and so that was Joanne. So Joanne, I'm not sure if you had a specific question or if you just wanted to just kind of look this over. So we have that on the screen now. But we had a couple questions, and I'm not sure if you have more resources to point people to regarding the generational topic that you went over, because some people just wanted just a little more around it. So if you have maybe some resources, or what we can do too is I'm going to, when I send the follow-up email, I'll be including all of the values, inventories and everything that everyone shared with me. So I'll send a list to everyone. And then Sandra, if you have more resources, I can absolutely include those in there.
Yeah.
That way no one has to worry about taking notes.
We could certainly put together a list of books or articles that are available on the topic. I know that there are just dozens and dozens out there, and so, you know, perhaps the best way to approach it if you're looking for more information is we could share a list of resources like books and articles that are available on this topic. I think one of the things to consider is this information on generations and views towards career. It's kind of like Myers Briggs preferences. It does certainly influence our behavior and how we view work, and these are trends that have been reported in the research, but each individual is different and unique. So sometimes what you'll see in the research is the actual time frames for each generation might vary slightly. And when you think about coaching individuals, I always think it's important to identify what's really important to the individual. It may be that you're working with someone who's a Generation Y or in that new generation that we're still learning about, who identifies really strongly with a baby boomer for some reason. So, while it's great general information to work with, we don't want to pigeonhole people based on their generation either.
Thanks. And actually, I had two people that sent me the same title. Thank you, Brandy and William. It's called Generations Bridging the Gap with Type by Murray and Rutledge. And I'm going to, you don't have to take notes. I'll be including this in the list that I send out. But thank you for sending that resource. That's great. So now, let's see. I had another couple of questions regarding the Z-chart. Do you mind going to that slide, the Z-chart, please? So Kimberly had asked, should an individual use all four of these?
When I think about the Z method and I think about effective decision making, my opinion on that is absolutely, I think that to be most effective at making decisions, whether it's a decision about a career choice or any other decision, if we can use all four of these preferences, it's going to increase our likelihood of being more accurate with our decision. There are lots of examples of decisions historically that have been made that were perhaps poor decisions. And if you take a look at this Z chart, typically what you'll find is, if you really think about that historical decision that was made, it may be that they left out one of these preferences. So, kind of the common ones that are sometimes used in workshops around Myers Briggs or other decision-making workshops are decisions like the decision to launch New Coke. And while wow, it's probably a really creative decision, the customers were outraged. So did they really use their feeling preference and consider the impact on the people that were their customer? Or other historical decisions like the Ford Pinto tragedy, where logically they looked at the cost of battling lawsuits compared to, cost of taking the Ford Pinto off the market, and decided to leave that car on the market when potentially it could explode. Again, there was a lot of logical thinking that was looked at if you look at books and information around that decision, but yet maybe, again, they didn't consider the feeling preference and how customers might be reacting to that. So I think we can be most effective with any decision, including a career decision, if we, pause and really think about all of these preferences, making sure we've looked at all the facts. So the facts might include information about the position, maybe gathering data about that role, interviewing people that are currently performing that role, asking questions about it, and then including data about myself and the skills I possess, the experiences I possess that would make me successful in that position. Looking at the big picture, thinking about where this next role might lead in the future, considering a number of different options, and then applying the logic and looking at the feeling preference and the impact on overall life, values, perhaps other people that are in the equation. A lot of times when you think about advancing into senior leadership roles, in many companies, if it's a large company, and we have a lot of global companies today, in many companies, as you advance into senior leadership roles, it's important to be open to relocation. That certainly has an impact on your life outside of work. It's certainly a process to go through relocation into a new community and a new environment. And so, you know, what comes into play there is thinking about, is that something that I'm willing to do? So my answer to that question, my opinion is yes, I think it's most effective to look at all four.
Okay, thank you. So Emily had sent a question that she asked, are institutions of higher education included in the top performing companies or just for-profit companies?
Most of the research that I am familiar with was gathered in more corporate environments. I haven't seen anything that has been inclusive of the university environment. If you're thinking about the research on developing people into senior leadership positions, the research on women in leadership, of course, we saw some of the statistics where we've got the definition between the not-for-profit, the university setting, and the corporate environment. But most of the other research that I'm familiar with in terms of companies that have succession planning in place are focused on high potential development and movement into those leadership roles. Most of that research is focused on the corporate environment. So it would be interesting to know, it may be another good question, if you're aware of an article or a book that focuses upon development of leaders in a university setting, that might be something that would be helpful to share with this group, and you can type that in your comments.
Okay, Sherry asks, are there strategies for helping leaders to downsize their leadership roles, such as to move from the high-level decision-making to the gifts of work disengagement, retirement, or less C-suite roles?
So I want to make sure that I understand the question. I think you're asking, are there guidelines or recommendations or strategies for helping someone perhaps downsize their leadership position or share that position with someone else in terms of taking on a lower position?
Yes, that's what it sounds like.
You know, I haven't seen a specific process for that, but, you know, I can tell you in the career planning and career development coaching and training sessions that I have done and those that I have attended and I'm familiar with, I think that is something important to consider as a valuable career choice. I think there are many times in someone's career when it's completely appropriate to step down to a lower level position or perhaps take a step back from a leadership position to a lower level position or a technical position. And I think it goes back to understanding the individual and what they bring to really the four areas that we've talked about. So at this time in their life, you know, perhaps they've been working in a senior leadership position, but it may be at this particular time in their life, for various reasons, they're no longer interested in continuing to serve in that role. It may be that they have other interests outside of work that are more important to them if they're getting close to retirement. Or it may be for whatever reason they are more engaged by the technical work and they'd like to return to doing more of the technical work like engineering or working on a project because they like to take on less leadership responsibility. So something might change in this puzzle around their interest at this phase in their life. Thinking about the skills and the experiences, the competencies, if for whatever reason they're not performing at the same level that they have in the past. Perhaps the organization has changed and there's an important skill that has been a development area for them that they haven't been able to develop over a number of years. Sometimes it might be appropriate to have someone step back from a leadership position because you need someone in that leadership role that has a certain skill. I had a conversation about this with a group of people recently, and we were talking about a leadership position and how the leader role within this organization really required someone that could be an effective networking individual out in the community. So they needed to be effective at building effective relationships out in the community in a number of organizations. And they weren't sure the current leader in that position would be able to do that. They were very skilled at leading the organization and leading the program, leading the technical role that was required within the organization, but yet there's a need perhaps to bring in a higher level, more senior leader who has that ability to network. So it could be that something in that part of the puzzle has changed. And again, style, thinking about the work environment and behavioral preferences, Myers Briggs preferences around style. And then it could be that they've had a value shift. And so, something that's currently happening could cause someone to think about their values. And if they've been working long hours for a very long time, they may have a shift in their values and what's important to them, and may decide that they no longer want to work the same number of hours that they have in the past. So I think it's important to identify what the reason is for the change, and then I think it's appropriate to think about the overall responsibilities and what might be the most appropriate role as they downsize that role or hand off responsibilities to others, or perhaps step into a role that at this point in time is a better match for what would be ideal. So this ideal job description, it's not a one-time event. It's something that it could be effective to go back to this periodically throughout your career and think about, based upon where I am right now in my career, what is my ideal role and how well does my current position fit with that, and what would be the ideal next step.
Thanks, Sandra. So we have several more questions, but what I'd like to do is I'll ask one more, and then if you don't mind, I need to go over the last few slides, and then we'll continue on with a few more. So here's one from Bruce. Bruce says, I like the career development scorecard concept. 2 concerns to address with the client, individual or organizational, in using it successfully is specifying unclear or unrealistic objectives, ensuring the metrics fully capture even well-defined objectives. Have you experienced these or other risks when using it?
I think the hardest part about using a scorecard is it does actually take time to measure your results. So I think you're right on target with thinking about your objectives ahead of time, taking this into consideration and thinking about what's realistic in terms of your resources and your time commitment and the amount of time that you have to gather this kind of information. Because it does take some time to really go back and follow up with participants, gather the information, and to share that. So I think the biggest challenge that I've encountered is finding the time to actually go back and measure the results. But if you do take the time to do it, I actually think there's a huge return in terms of doing this, because if you're able to demonstrate these results to your executive sponsors, perhaps the people that put together the budget for your program, I think that it shows that what you're doing is valuable. It may lead to more future support for your program. And I think it's also valuable to share these kind of results with your participants. So, sometimes taking a small step, whether it's in a one-on-one coaching session or a workshop, to let the participants know, here are some of the results that we have seen from past participants. I think it can help your individuals that are receiving your career coaching or career development services understand what's expected of them, that it is expected that after they attend the program or after they receive coaching that they take action. And you give them some examples of people that have come before them. So I do think it is a valuable investment of your time, not just to deliver your career development services, but take the time to step back, monitor your success, and come up with a plan to share that success with others. So at the simplest level, if you felt like this was a lot to bite off initially, at the simplest level, if you're not currently asking for an evaluation or using any kind of structured questions or an evaluation form, at the simplest level you might say, okay, I'm going to start out with just the first level and get some kind of gauge around satisfaction, and then you could start slowly and build up to including other measures of success.
Okay, thanks, Sandra. Do you mind going to the last few slides, please? Perfect, thank you. Okay, so this is my usual spiel at the end. So this is just about these are all of our links online, so join us online. We have our LinkedIn CPT education group where you can start discussions, talk about the webinar. If you had more questions, just ask those there. Talk to your other fellow LinkedIn group people there. We're on Facebook, Twitter, of course Twitter, blog, and on Pinterest, so check us out. Next slide. And we have a promotion right now. So when you spend $350 or more, you can receive this Type Pen mug along with a $25 Amazon gift card. The promo to use is May 2014, which is on the screen there. There's information to call customer relations. So it's 800-624-1765. And the offer will expire on June 12th. And this will be, again, the things that I talk about will be included in the follow-up email, so you don't have to worry about jotting these things down. Next slide. Now, this is just information for anyone that may be an international customer. If you're interested in purchasing any products or any more information, please visit our site, which is cbp.com/global sales. And another thing that I always include in the webinars is we get some emails from people that don't receive a follow-up email from us. That's actually because you may actually be unsubscribed from our system. So to make sure that you do get the follow-ups that we'll be sending out between tomorrow and Monday, please make sure to check out your email preferences, and you can just go to cpp.com/email preps as it's shown on the screen. So make sure that you check that. Like I said, I've had many times that I've checked. Someone hasn't received an email from us, and it's because it's unsubscribed, and we're not allowed to send out any emails if you're unsubscribed. Next slide. Sonia, can you go to the next slide, please? Oh, sorry, back. It wasn't going to. This is certificate information. So basically, this is talking about how you can be eligible for the NBCC credit and MBTI Master Practitioner credit. There's a fee. It's an administrative fee of $7.95 plus tax. Now, these are just the requirements for eligibility. So if you're eligible, that means that you attended for the webinar for an hour or longer. That means that you were on it the entire time. Our system tracks all of these attendee views by screen. So if you only called in, as you can see there, if you only called in and did not view it on the screen, our system can't track that. So those are not eligible. And we will be sending out an email. So for those of you that are eligible, will receive an email with the instructions on how to purchase this. Those who are not eligible will receive an email as well, but it will not have this information. So look out for that because that's how you can purchase the certificate. And that was it for us. So let me go back, and we have about 5 more minutes to ask a few more questions. Let's see here. So I had another one, Sandra from Andrew, that asked, could you speak, and this is a really good point, could you speak to the appearance of the Z method and how it looks to favor S before N and T before F? Thoughts? I understand the importance of pausing and using all aspects. However, the order gives the idea that one preference may be more important over another.
Okay, I think that's a really good question. The Z method actually comes from the research on Myers Briggs, and it's just a common methodology, and I've always seen it referred to as the Z method, but in terms of practice, what I believe is most important is that you use all of the preferences, and if you're actually, say for example in a room with a number of people trying to make a decision, I don't think the order is as important as using all of them, because I think what happens in practice, based upon our personality preferences or based upon perhaps the predominant preference that you might have in the room, is we might be inclined to use some of those preferences first. So naturally, if you're in a discussion, even if it's with an individual, if they have a strong preference for N, N may be the first thing that comes out. So rather than interrupting the person and saying, hey, let's go in this order, you may be able to capture all of that information first. But I do think the most important piece is not leaving a preference out. And in practice, I think it's just as valuable to use all of the preferences in a different order. The most important thing is that you cover each piece. But in the research, I've always seen it referred to as the Z method, and always just seen, that kind of, approach. So I think the most important thing is having an approach that incorporates all the preferences. I don't think it's as important what order you do them. And I think our own natural style might lead us to covering some of the other preferences first, just based upon our own preferences, our style, and our inclination. The most important thing is don't leave one out.
Thanks, Sandra. And I was looking at the wrong time. We actually have 1 more minute left. So that was the last question. But since we've run out of time, but thank you everyone for attending. And thank you, Sandra. This was a really great webinar. And I see many future webinars coming about from the topics that you brought up during this. So thank you for sharing your expertise with us today. And everyone, like I mentioned a few times, please look out for our follow-up email, which we'll be sending out between Friday and Monday of next week. And we will be including the webinar recording. We will have the resources that were mentioned earlier, including the ones that Sandra had talked about in one of her last slides. And I'm also going to be putting together just a really short, it's going to be like a 1-question survey to get your input on topics because, like I mentioned before, Kim Rivera is going to be taking over the series for 2014-2015. So we would love to hear some topic suggestions. I did hear some about generation and MBTI, so that's definitely noted. And so we always appreciate that, so please look out for that. It'll be included in the email. Remember to also check out our website. So it's cpp.com/askanexpert. You're going to find the upcoming webinars as well as previously recorded webinars on there, which if you visited that page, you see that we have so many of them. So check those out. But thank you all. Again, thank you, Sandra, for this wonderful webinar and for your time. And I hope you all have a wonderful day. Thank you so much. Bye-bye, Sandra.
Bye.